Hello and welcome to Session 3, Workshop 8. If you're enjoying the learning today, you can pay the joy forward by going to the Ed Collab site and finding out how you can donate to Circle of Health International and our other adopted charities for today. Because the Ed Collab gathering is a day of free learning, we invite you to donate what you would have spent on coffee, lunch, or even registration for an amazing day like this. Pay it forward to support others. Today, we welcome Michele Haiken for her session, Multi-Genre Writing to Deepen Student Understanding. Michele Haiken has been teaching for 20 years. She's a middle school English teacher in New York, as well as an author and presenter. Her most recent book is New Realms for Writing, Inspire Student Expression with Digital Age Formats. You can follow her on Twitter at Teaching Factor. If you are on Twitter today, you can share your learning using the hashtag #TheEdCollabGathering, a space, and a hashtag 8. And now I'm excited to welcome Michele Haiken to the Ed Collab Gathering.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I have to give a shout out to Jessica for everything she's done in helping me set up and helping all the technology run smoothly today. So we're so glad that you are here. And thank you to the Ed Collab for including me in this exciting day of PD in your PJs. So I'm going to talk about multi-genre writing to deepen student understanding. This is an interdisciplinary project that I do with my 8th grade students. And we've been doing this now going into, this year will be our 3rd year that I've sort of taken this deep dive into multi-genre. The idea of multi-genre, we've seen it in some young adult literature and other literature that we are reading and offering in our classroom libraries, as well as Tom Romano is really like the person who I have to say has created this multi-genre writing assignment as a way to incorporate into our English classrooms across grade levels and content. And in his book, Blending Genre, Altering Style, he talks a lot about the beauty of multi-genre, because why should we have to actually confine our students to one particular genre when we are doing different units of study in our writing workshop? Our students throughout their schooling experiences learn to write literary essays, they are writing opinion, op-ed pieces, they're writing poetry. Maybe you are doing some movie making and podcasting in your classroom. So why not offer that as options in creating a really multi-rich, multimodal experience for your students about a particular topic that you're doing for a unit of study, or even for their own passion project that they might be working on. So in this presentation today, I'm going to talk about the multi-genre steps that I take with my students for a particular integrated thematic unit that we do in the spring. I'll share different examples of scaffolding and artifacts that I use with my students. And then also think about, even though I'm going to talk about how this connects with a social studies project that my students are doing, you can do this in collaboration with any content area and also with any grade level. So yes, I'm working with 8th graders, but you can bring this into your 5th grade classroom. You could bring this into your high school classroom and think about how you can utilize it based on the units of study that your students are doing. So as I mentioned before, we have a lot of different great YA literature and even adult literature that is blending different multimodal experiences. The more recent Sadie by Courtney Summers is told through interviews and snippets of podcasts, as well as contemporary fiction, to understand what happened to our protagonist Sadie and her sister. Really compelling. It was a great read. I recommend it for those of you teaching 8th grade and higher. Even Sharon Draper's Tears of a Tiger, Avi's Nothing But the Truth. These are all contemporary young adult fiction that are using multi-genre. And I want to just take a moment to compare a multi-genre versus multi-perspective. A lot of times we have YA books and classic literature where each chapter is a different perspective telling the story. That's really not the multi-genre that I'm talking about. I'm talking about multi-genre today in terms of multi-formats or multi-genres of writing to help tell one particular story or topic. So the rationale behind the unit that I am going to talk about and I created with my colleague 3 years ago for our 8th grade students. My students in the spring, this is in New York State, are reading and learning about World War II and the Holocaust. We wanted to bring in different literature circles and all different books about World War II. And we felt that it would be really great and more powerful if we both were on the same page and in the same unit at the same time so that we can collaborate, integrate, and work together. So we designed this unit to really bring the social studies and English together and to have time for us to co-teach, to collaborate, and for our students to be building their literacy skills as well as historical knowledge about World War II. And we're combining the next gen literacy standards as well as the new C3 framework with social studies standards so that we can promote not only close reading and critical thinking, but also to give students a deeper understanding about this particular time period in history and the complexity of this time period in history. And then the outcome would be that students would create their own multi-genre text about a particular subject within the complexities of World War II. So the final project, what we thought in terms of what we wanted our 8th graders to create was to create a multi-genre piece that incorporated 5 different primary sources so that students were researching and finding actual historical documents based off of the topic that they're studying, and then to write and create 5 creative writing pieces off of those different primary sources, highlighting a common theme. And I'm going to give you a link later on. You'll see different portions of a student of mine, her actual multi-genre piece, and I'll share a link with you later on where you could actually read her entire multi-genre piece to see how it turned out. So in terms of my actual English class, as I mentioned, we're utilizing literature circles to really build and frame their understanding of the time period. And I have all different sets of books in my classroom, and I was going to buying books on Amazon, getting my department chair to buy more books, as well as finding books at used bookstores so that I can just build a robust library of books about World War II, the Holocaust, Japanese internment. So we have sets of about 20, somewhere between, depending on the book, 10 to 20 copies of the Diary of Anne Frank. I use a lot of graphic novels in my classroom. So there was Resistance is one, Mouse 2, The Boys Who Challenged Hitler, all different books. When it came to Japanese internment, we had Farewell to Manzanar. We also did On the Corner of The Hotel at the Corner of Bitter and Sweet. Alan Grantz's book Refugee was great to add to the piece, as well as Ruta Septi's Salt of the Sea and her Between Shades of Grey are both great books to add. I mean, there are so many books about this time period, and to give students the opportunity to read and learn and explore really helped them to understand what was going on at this time period. In addition, they're learning specific events and dates that would help them build that foundational knowledge to understand the complexities in their book in their social studies class. But for the first week or so, they're working on reading a book of their own choosing and then meeting in their book groups to talk about and to share the insight that they're learning from both memoirs and diaries and true stories, as well as the historical fiction that was in the collection. So as they're reading these multiple genres, we're also reading, and I am including different genres in our class to learn more. So they might be looking at primary documents, legal documents, excerpts from the historical fiction, memoir, poetry, diary entries. We brought this into the classroom to study and look at, not only as to understand and build content knowledge and more and get and learn more about World War II and what was going on throughout the world, but also to study the genres themselves. I put up the last letters from the Holocaust, 1943. This is an online exhibit that Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Israel, has online, where you can actually read through the letters in from people who were being sent to the ghettos, being sent to concentration camps, that were either snuck or smuggled through and sent to their families. And I had actually printed out many of the different letters around my room, and then students were able to read through the letters, and we did some writing off of that. You have the picture on the bottom, that portrait of Felix Nussbaum, who was considered a degenerate artist by Hitler and the Nazi Party, because Hitler attacked modern art during World War II. So we spent a whole day looking at what was considered degenerate art and bringing in visual imagery and graphics and designs and visual responses to this time period as something to look at and study, and also then utilize in our multi-genre text. So I talked about the last letter, reading the different letters and discussing about the letters led students back into their own notebooks to do their own letters, if whether they wanted to write as the protagonist in the book that they're reading, or think about it from a person based on what they were writing about in their multi-genre. It became a catalyst for thinking and discussing and diving deeply into the topic, you know, because that's really what we want our students to do with history and understanding history and teaching the social studies. We don't want them to just know dates and places and specific facts, but we want them really to empathize and understand the complexities, as well as realize that history, the basis of history and the word itself, is about story. What are these stories that have been collected about a time, and what do they tell us about the people who were involved, and whose story gets told versus whose stories have been ignored or are unfamiliar, and how can we bring those stories to the forefront? So after 2 weeks or so of preliminary work with looking at different formats and genres and studying and understanding more about the time period and the complexities of the time period based on the historical fiction and the memoirs and the diaries that students were reading, then we gave them this multi-genre project and planner that sort of broke down the assignment into 5 different pieces. So the students had to choose a particular theme related to World War II, and then within that theme, dig a little deeper. To understand more and pull back what they were going to formulate and write about, and also direct and guide where the primary sources that they were looking for. So themes, anything from being an upstander, who were the people that stood up and spoke out to protect those who are being persecuted. Maybe they wanted to focus primarily on the victims or the perpetrators. The Boys Who Challenge Hitler is really about resistance. Some of my students wanted to focus on that aspect of who were the resistors and what does it take to be a resistor. The book White Rose, which came out earlier in the spring, which is told in verse about the young people involved in the White Rose movement who were challenging Hitler and the Nazi Party. That was a great place for those who were looking at resistance. And then within that, what did they want to focus on? I had a student this spring who was really interested in the brainwashing of youth, German youth during this time. And he wanted to focus on, even he was focusing on the perpetrators, but he was even going deeper with that to focus on, what does it take and what were the experiences of young children who were brainwashed to hate. And then we talk about formulating a claim and the topic. What about Hitler Youth? What about a victim? What about nationalism or being an upstander or choices? And then you can see how I have helped give different examples. And then beneath there is a place for them to start teasing out the claim and about their topic, about their theme. You'll see on the right, I have that web address where it will take you to the entire uh, multi-genre project and planner. Feel free to make a copy of it. If you have questions throughout, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions that you have now or later on. I'll share my email at the end of the presentation. So from once the students had their theme and they had formulated a claim, keeping in mind that claims sort of formulate and evolve as they're collecting research, we started to find our primary sources. What is the evidence that we need to help us communicate that claim and our theme. And yes, I would say that a multi-genre is not necessarily a research project or a research paper, but it is something that involves research. We wanted our students to create a project that was grounded in primary sources and factual information to help them begin to articulate their understanding, their empathy, and their learning about this particular time period. So you'll see that I created this graphic organizer to really scaffold and support my students through the process of working on their multi-genre pieces. So it was the 5 primary sources, and we collected our primary sources before we attempted to formalize any of our creative pieces in the different genres. So students had to find the primary sources, and we, with the help of our school librarian, we were using different databases to pull up that information. Then they had to properly source where it was from. And then that synthesis genesis piece is pushing them to think about what are they going to do with it? How are they going to turn it into something, and how does it help to support their theme and their understanding? So why is it significant? And how does it illustrate your claim? And there are spaces for students to write and find 5 different primary sources. And you'll see up on the top, it says in 5 genres. So each of their primary sources had to be a different genre, as each of their creative pieces had to be a different genre. You can't find 5 photographs. So it was really great to see how students would, like if they were doing the dropping of the atomic bomb and on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and the impact that it had on Japanese citizens, they might have an actual photograph of a before and after, and then their next primary source might be the actual presidential letter exclaiming what happened. They even went in to look at diaries and writings from past presidents about the experience and the choices that they had to make. And students were digging deep about topics that they were interested in, and that really helped to drive their projects and move their projects forward. So moving from research to creative writing, a key thing that I talked about, choice. You know, students had a choice in their topics, they had a choice in their formats, in the genres. They were choosing and guiding their own research and their own creative writing. I, as their teacher facilitator, was constantly providing a wealth of models and genres and experiences to help them. During workshop and research time, both my social studies colleague and myself, we would help students find information or find a primary source that was going to support their thinking. We'd pull out a book, or maybe start with a read aloud to help them and to expand on or explore an idea. We really want to allow students various modes of expression to speak their vision, and by those offering those different models and genres, that help them to formulate how they were going to speak their vision and what was the best way to present that. Can they themselves, if they're an artist, create a moving visual image to support a diary entry that they found? Or maybe they found a speech and they wanted to write a monologue off of that. Or a letter. So students are in control of the content of their pieces rather than it being prescribed to, okay, we're going to do a poetry anthology about World War II and the Holocaust, or we're going to write a research report and just show me your findings. Again, using creative writing, students are stepping into their research and finding ways to layer their stories and their primary sources in a way that is captivating and moving. So in Morgan's multi-genre project, she chose to represent the Holocaust victims, and she wanted to show the strength that it took to persevere in spite of all the challenges that they faced. And each student included either author's note or introduction at the beginning of their multi-genre piece, or they did an author's note at the end. And within the author's note and the introduction, they talked about not only what they learned, but also described the different primary sources and the uniqueness of them and the creative pieces that they made. Morgan decided to write poems. She did a diary entry. She did a letter. She did her own little historical historical fiction piece about one particular family. And, it was so moving to see her piece, because she, as well as so many of my other students, really by stepping in the shoes of the characters and the stories that they were telling, you can tell there was a deep connection with the work that they were doing and their learning and their understanding. So here is just one excerpt from Morgan's multi-genre paper. You'll see that for her primary sources, she chose two different photographs, and then she wrote a poem. So she's basing the poem off of Hitler's Nuremberg rally in 1936. And her poem is called The Fear of Being Taken. She wanted to express the overwhelming amount of Nazis who were taught to hate and took on this power to kill for the sake of killing. And she wrote the poem about a girl who knows what Hitler is doing is not right, but she is afraid to help in fear of being taken away. Or seen as someone going against a Nazism during the time. So in the next slide, here is her poem. The fear of being taken, the fear of being taken. Must I always awaken to the fear of being taken, to the fear of hearing them pounding on my door, as they have done to many people before? The number of school children become less and less, until the classroom is almost empty, and I must suppress the question that pounds my head day and night. Where are they taken, and who says this is right? Who will help? Who shall it be? And now I wonder, should it have been me? My silence has brought death, fatigue, and sorrow. While I feast today, others famish tomorrow. So why haven't I helped them all these years while they were torn from their homes and stifled their tears? I choose fear while others were forced to be brave. This choice of mine has put others in their grave. Knock, knock, knock. The room becomes silent except for a quiet tick-tock. They have come for me now. My time has run out. What will I do? What should I shout? But who will save me? Who do I expect when all I have been doing is allowing the neglect? Now I just sit here contemplating. So someone please tell me, why have I been waiting? Super powerful. She talks about bystanders. She talks about fear. She talks about people who are victims, all different elements that we can pull out from our understanding about this particular time period. So that author's note and reflection. So I wanted my students to write an author's note to bring closure to the project, and they had to address like their topic and the thesis or claim. How did they select the theme, and what personal connections had they made? How their research and writing had opened their eyes to World War II, and what did they learn, and what did they want their readers to take away? What are the consequences of not remembering World War II and the Holocaust? And that last piece, that last question was really important to me, because we see such a rise of anti-Semitism and hatred and intolerance today. And really by studying this time period, we're able to help students see injustice and hope that they can then stand up for intolerance and injustice and speak out when they see hate, so that something like this does not happen again. you know, in terms of the author's note, that became a whole day lesson. We looked and studied different author's notes and introductions, which I find are so robust in both historical fiction today as well as nonfiction books. I was moved by Ruta Septi's Salt of the Sea, and she had a line at the end of her author's note, I am attempting to uncover, where she sort of lays out, in all honesty, this is what I was doing in this book about all these young teens who were trying to escape Lithuania, who got on a ship that then was torpedoed and sunk in the ocean. And we looked at that particular example that the author presents. Also in Radium Girls by Kate Moore, another great historical novel, nonfiction. She talks about when she first discovered and what she was struck by. And we took out and teased out from these different examples of authors' notes, the lines that our authors were using to reflect and to bring to the forefront for their readers, that we just made a whole list of those sentence starters that you see in the bottom right, that students then could use for their own author's note and creating. So my students, actually, their pieces were all written, and it was something that we shared online in our Google Classroom for other people to read and see. But, you know, there are so many great technology enhancements that can take this multi-genre project to another level. Adobe Spark, you can use video storytelling. Students can include those, going back where I talked about multimodal literacy and being creative communicators, even using Book Creator for publishing ebooks. That's an avenue that I'm looking at for this year. And having my school get a subscription so that their multi-genre pieces are actually ebooks. Blogging is another opportunity, depending on your technology policies in your school, but you can use Kid Blog or Blogger if you're a Google School to share students' multi-genre writings in a blog format. Pear Deck or even Google Slides to make interactive presentations is another way that we could enhance and share and build a wider audience for our students' writing. So getting back to, and what I want to talk about in the last few minutes that I have is the whole idea of multi-genre pieces and projects. So even though I talk about multi-genre that I did in connection with my social studies teacher about World War II, if you're in 5th grade and you want to bring a social studies history aspect and you're focusing on westward expansion, think about how that might be put together in a multi-genre project. Think about how you can connect it with science and look at different science topics today, depending on what you're studying, chemistry or physics, or even as a way to debate current contemporary topics as well. You can do something in the Middle Ages, or it could be something that your students are passionate about and want to focus on, choosing a particular theme that they want to investigate and share. It's really about creating layers of perspective and depth on a subject, or a theme or a topic when we ask students to produce something in a multi-genre project. And it doesn't have to all be different writing formats. They might want to bring in podcasts. They could bring in interview clips. They can bring in visuals and photographs or pictures that they draw to help showcase their research and their learning and their understanding. So the last piece that I'll add, we have about 4 minutes left, is please connect with me, share your multi-genre projects. You can connect with me on Twitter or on my blog or through my email. So I'd love to hear what you are creating and making with your students. The idea today is to make learning relevant and to allow students the choice and also to give them the voice to really showcase what they love and what they know.
Thank you so much, Michele. That was so inspiring. I was frantically jotting down notes of ways that I can integrate this in my own practice as well. So, I mean, I was just, the words of your own students was so powerful. Like you can see that they really took on the idea of, perspective to show empathy. And we just really appreciate your time and your students' work and sharing those words with us today. So, thank you everyone who joined us today. If you popped in midway during the session and you want to catch the entire workshop, this will be archived on the Ed Collab site and YouTube page, so you can enjoy it from beginning to end. And at this time, it's your chance to get up and stretch and get ready for session 4, which starts at 2 Eastern. We're very excited for our next round of presenters to pop in. So again, Michele, thank you so much for today.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for all your hard work, Jessica.
Oh, thanks. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.